The message came later than I expected. Not late enough to apologize, just late enough to explain nothing. Maybe next year. End quote. That was all it said. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Long enough to notice my hands were still. Long enough to realize I wasn't waiting for more. There was a time when a message like that would have hurt immediately. Sharp. Personal. This time, it didn't. There was no rush of emotion, no tightening in my chest. Just space. I didn't type back. Not because I didn't care, because I already knew what the silence would say. I had stopped asking a long time ago, stopped reminding, stopped making it easy for my absence to be noticed. So when the message came, it didn't feel like rejection. It felt like confirmation. I set the phone down and let the quiet sit where a reply used to be. That's when I understood something important. The silence wasn't new. It had just finally reached me. I don't remember deciding to stop asking. There wasn't a moment where I said it out loud, even to myself. It happened the way habits do, quietly, after enough small adjustments. At first, I asked like anyone else would. Simple questions. Casual reminders. What time are you thinking? I'm set into. Do you know yet? It's only duh. Just checking. Good. I told myself those questions were normal, that they were part of staying connected. But over time, the answers changed. They became shorter, too less certain, often delayed. I'm not sure yet, end quote. We'll see, end quote. I'll let you know. It's considerat, and it was roving at process, it's considerat, and then sometimes, nothing. I noticed how often I was the one initiating, how rarely information arrived without prompting. I told myself it didn't mean anything. People are busy. Lives get full. I didn't want to be the person who needed constant updates. So I adjusted. I asked less. Not all at once. I skipped one reminder, then another. I waited longer before checking in. I told myself I was giving space, that I was being respectful, that not asking showed trust. But trust wasn't what I felt. What I felt was caution, a careful pulling back, so I wouldn't seem impatient, so I wouldn't seem needy, so I wouldn't create pressure where none was welcome. Each time I didn't ask, nothing bad happened. No conflict, no awkward conversations. That felt like confirmation. I told myself I was doing the right thing. I told myself this was maturity. I noticed how much relief there was in not waiting for answers anymore. If I didn't ask, I couldn't be disappointed. If I didn't ask, I couldn't be ignored. Silence became easier than uncertainty, and gradually, it became my default. I stopped asking about plans. I stopped asking about timing. I stopped asking where I fit, not because I didn't care, because caring had started to feel like risk. I had learned that questions could linger unanswered, that reminders could feel inconvenient, so I removed them. I told myself I was making things easier for them, easier for me. I began to assume I would hear only what I needed to know, that if something mattered, someone would tell me. That belief felt safer than waiting. I didn't realize how much that assumption changed my role. Without questions, I became passive, not invisible, just undefined. I wasn't part of the planning anymore. I existed outside of it. I told myself that was fine, that independence was healthy, that I didn't need to be involved in everything. But there's a difference between choosing distance and being edged into it quietly. I didn't see the line at first. I crossed it one small decision at a time. Each time I stayed silent, the structure adjusted without me. Plans were made. Timelines shifted. And I found out afterward, not always directly, sometimes through passing comments, sometimes through photos, sometimes not at all. I noticed how little reaction there was to my absence from the conversation. No one followed up to ask why I hadn't checked in. No one said, "I wondered if you were still coming." Quote, my silence didn't raise questions. That told me something. It told me I wasn't expected to ask, and once that expectation disappears, it rarely returns. I had thought not asking would protect me. From disappointment? From feeling left out. In some ways, it did, but it also removed me from consideration entirely. I realized how quickly people adapt to what you no longer request. How easily they assume you don't need updates because you stopped asking for them. I didn't blame anyone for that. It made sense. I had trained them. Not intentionally, but consistently. I saw how asking had once been a signal, a reminder that I was part of the flow. Without it, the flow moved on. I became someone who would be informed later, or not at all. And I told myself that was okay, because at least I wasn't waiting anymore. At least I wasn't refreshing my phone. At least I wasn't hoping. But that relief came with a cost. It made me smaller in the story. I stopped asking before anyone told me to. That was the part I couldn't ignore anymore. I had stepped back before being pushed, because stepping back felt controlled. It felt dignified. But dignity can sometimes look like disappearance when it's practiced too quietly. I thought about how often I had done this in other parts of my life. How often I removed myself before someone else could. How often I reduced my presence to avoid discomfort. That pattern wasn't new. It had just followed me here. I didn't stop asking because I didn't care. I stopped asking because I cared enough to not want to feel unwanted. But the moment I stopped asking, something else stopped too. Being considered. Not out of spite, out of habit. I didn't notice the shift at first because nothing dramatic happened. Life continued. Messages still came, just not the ones that included me in the plan. I had become someone who would hear about things later, or be told, gently, that maybe next year would be better. At the time, I thought stopping my questions was a way to protect myself. Now I see it differently. It was the beginning of my absence, not announced, not argued, just quietly accepted. And by the time the message finally came, by the time I read those words on the screen, I realized the truth had already been set. I hadn't stopped asking recently. I had stopped a long time ago, and everything that followed had simply caught up with that silence. I didn't learn to be low maintenance overnight. It wasn't a decision. It was an adjustment, one small change at a time. I stopped asking questions that didn't seem welcome, stopped checking in when answers came slowly, stopped reminding, just in case it felt like pressure. At first, it felt considerate. I told myself I was being respectful, that I was giving space. That independence was healthy. I didn't want to be the reason someone felt rushed, so I learned to need less. I learned to wait quietly, to assume plans would form without me, to trust that if something mattered, I would be told. That belief made things easier to manage my expectations, easier to avoid disappointment. If I didn't ask, I couldn't be ignored. If I didn't remind, I couldn't feel forgotten. Low maintenance felt like protection. I noticed how people responded to it. There was relief in their voices. Comfort. Thanks for being understanding. Don't ham. Sorry, things are hectic. There was one. They sounded grateful. And gratitude felt like confirmation that I was doing the right thing. So I leaned into it. I made myself easier to fit around. I didn't ask about dates. I didn't ask about times. I didn't ask how long things would last. I told myself flexibility was a gift. I didn't want to seem demanding. I didn't want to seem like an obligation. I wanted to be the kind of presence that didn't complicate things. Low maintenance became my quiet offering. I told myself it kept relationships light, that it prevented tension. But lightness has a cost when it removes weight entirely. I didn't see that at first. I noticed how information arrived later than it used to. Sometimes after decisions were already made. Sometimes through indirect mentions. Sometimes not at all. I told myself that was fine. I told myself I didn't need to be involved in everything. But there's a difference between choosing distance and being trained to accept it. I had stopped signaling availability without realizing I was also signaling absence. People adapt quickly to what you don't ask for. When I stopped requesting details, no one offered them. Not out of unkindness, out of efficiency. I had become easy to plan around because I didn't require planning. I noticed how rarely anyone asked, "Does this work for you?" Divert. That question had quietly disappeared. I didn't miss it at first. Not asking had simplified things. I didn't have to decide. I didn't have to commit. I could float on the edges, without friction. Low maintenance gave me distance, without confrontation. But distance changes how people see you. I realized that low maintenance doesn't invite inclusion. It permits omission. When someone doesn't need much, it's easy to assume they don't need to be considered. I had taught people that lesson without meaning to. I stopped mentioning upcoming dates. stopped asking about holidays. I told myself I was being mature, that I wasn't clinging to expectations. But expectation isn't the problem. Unspoken expectation is. I noticed how comfortable everyone became with my silence. No one asked if I wanted to be involved. They assumed I would say something, if I did, but I had already learned not to. That's how low maintenance works. It teaches others to rely on your quiet, and once they do, your quiet becomes part of the structure. I realized how much effort it took to maintain that ease. How often I had to override instinct. The instinct to ask, to check, to clarify. I suppressed those impulses because they felt like burdens. I didn't want to be the one who made things complicated. So I made myself simple, but simplicity isn't neutral. It erases nuance. It removes you from the equation. I saw how often my needs had become hypothetical, not real enough to be planned for. I told myself that if I needed something, I would speak up. But by then, speaking up felt unfamiliar, unnatural, like breaking a rule I had lived by for too long. Low maintenance had taught me how to disappear politely. I thought about how often I had praised myself for being easy, how proud I had been of not needing much. I saw now how that pride had shaped my place, not as someone integral, but as someone optional. Low maintenance people are easy to postpone. They don't remind you. They don't ask. So time stretches. Later, end quote. Soon. It's a little back, maybe next year, end quote. Those words land softly when there's no urgency attached. I realized then that urgency doesn't come from demand. It comes from intention, and intention fades when someone learns you don't require it. I didn't become low maintenance because I wanted less. I became low maintenance because I didn't want to lose connection. Ironically, it cost me exactly that. Not all at once, gradually, in ways that felt reasonable. I didn't notice when low maintenance stopped being a choice and became an identity. The one who doesn't need updates, the one who's flexible, the one who understands. Those labels felt kind, but they also came with assumptions that I would be fine, that I would adapt, that I wouldn't mind. I had made myself easy to postpone, and postponement has no urgency. It stretches until it becomes absence. I wasn't angry about that. Anger would have meant surprise. What I felt was recognition. Low maintenance hadn't protected me. It had trained people to leave me out gently. I had removed myself from the center before anyone asked me to, because being easy felt safer than being disappointed. Now I could see the trade clearly. Low maintenance had reduced friction, but it had also reduced presence. I hadn't been pushed aside. I had stepped aside repeatedly. And by the time the message finally arrived, by the time I read those words, maybe next year, too, end quote. End quote. It didn't feel sudden. It felt consistent. Low maintenance hadn't caused the loss. It had prepared the ground for it, quietly, patiently, without drama. Silence didn't arrive suddenly. It settled in the way routines do, quietly, after repetition. At first, silence was something I chose. A pause before asking, a moment of restraint. I told myself it was temporary, that I was simply waiting for the right time. But the right time never came, and silence stayed. I noticed it in the space between messages. Where there used to be questions, there was nothing. Where there used to be follow-ups, there was acceptance. I stopped reaching for my phone. Not because I didn't think of it, because I didn't expect anything to come from it. Silence stopped feeling like an action. It became the background. I realized how easily days passed, without clarification. Plans were mentioned casually, as if already settled. I wasn't part of the conversation, but I wasn't surprised either. That was new. There had been a time when silence felt heavy, when it raised questions. Now, it felt expected. I had learned what it meant. If no one said anything, nothing was required. I noticed how often I was informed after the fact. Not deliberately, just naturally. Oh, by the way, we decided to... Those phrases no longer startled me. I adjusted automatically. I didn't ask when decisions had been made. I didn't ask who had been consulted. I told myself it didn't matter. Silence had taught me what questions were unnecessary. I saw how quickly people adapted to my quiet. They stopped checking in, not because they didn't care, because they didn't need to. I had removed myself From the flow of decision-making, silence had made that official. I noticed how comfortable everyone seemed. With the arrangement, there was no tension, no awkwardness. That's what made it dangerous. Silence didn't disrupt anything. It allowed things to move smoothly. I thought about how rarely anyone asked, "Are you okay with this?" And it wasn't exactly. That question had quietly vanished. I realized how much relief silence created for others. No pressure, no explanation required. Silence simplified things, but it simplified me too. I became predictable in my absence. People knew I wouldn't question changes, knew I wouldn't need reassurance. Silence had become my signature. I thought about how often I told myself, if it mattered, they would tell me. Quote, "She was also an AIDS." That belief allowed silence to feel reasonable. It also allowed me to stop being considered, because consideration requires friction. It requires checking. Silence removed that need. I noticed how my reactions changed. I stopped feeling surprised. I stopped feeling disappointed. Not because things improved, because I had lowered expectation. Expectation had felt risky. Silence felt safe. I didn't realize how much I had normalized it, how easily I accepted gaps, missed updates, delayed messages. I told myself this was what adulthood looked like. People busy with their lives. I didn't want to be another demand, so I stayed quiet. I noticed how silence began to define my role. I was the one who didn't need reminders, the one who didn't ask questions. That identity solidified. People referenced it casually. "She's fine." It's not with come, she understands. It's say, and I did. At least, I didn't object. But understanding isn't the same as agreement. Silence blurred that line. I thought about how rarely anyone asked what I wanted. Not because they didn't care, because I hadn't asked either. Silence had become mutual. And mutual silence feels stable. It feels settled. But stability without presence isn't connection. It's coexistence. I noticed how easy it became to imagine my absence, not as loss, as convenience. Silence prepared everyone for that. It taught them that nothing needed to be adjusted for me, that I would adapt later. I had become someone who would hear about things after they happened, and I accepted that. Because silence had taught me, that anticipation only led to discomfort. I thought about the first times I chose not to ask, how deliberate those moments had been. Now, silence required no decision. It happened on its own. That's when I knew it had become normal. I no longer noticed the urge to speak. It faded. Questions formed less often, and when they did, they felt unnecessary. Silence had rewritten my instincts. I didn't see myself as excluded. I saw myself as peripheral. That distinction mattered. Exclusion hurts. Peripheral placement feels logical. I told myself this was simply how things were now, that families change, roles shift. Silence felt like adaptation, but adaptation has limits. And silence, left unchecked, turns into erasure. I didn't notice that line being crossed, because nothing dramatic marked it. No argument, no confrontation, just the steady absence of sound. I realized how rarely anyone filled silence for me, how rarely anyone said, "Let me explain." AF it is weird. They didn't need to. Silence implied acceptance, and acceptance, once assumed, rarely gets revisited. I thought about how different this felt from earlier years. Back then, silence raised concern. Now, it raised nothing. That told me something important. Silence had become part of the structure. Not a pause, not a choice, a condition. And conditions shape outcomes. When silence becomes normal, being left out no longer feels like a decision. It feels like momentum. I wasn't pushed aside. I had simply stopped making noise. And the world had learned how to move without me. That realization didn't hurt sharply. It settled slowly, like understanding the rules of a game you didn't know you were playing. Silence had changed meaning. It was no longer restraint. It was resignation. Not dramatic, not conscious, just familiar. And familiarity is powerful. It keeps things the way they are, until something breaks through it. The message would come later. Simple, delayed, and when it did, it wouldn't feel surprising, because silence had already prepared me. It had trained me to expect nothing, And when nothing arrives, you don't ask why. You just accept. That silence has spoken for everyone. The message didn't arrive at a dramatic moment. There was no build-up, no sense of anticipation. It came during an ordinary part of the day, when nothing in particular was happening. That was what made it fit so easily. I noticed it because the phone lit up, not because I had been waiting for it. Maybe next year. I'm seeded furs. 4 words. No greeting. No explanation. Not an apology. Not a promise. Just a postponement. I looked at the screen for a long moment, long enough to notice how calm my body felt. There was no tightening in my chest, no sharp intake of breath. That surprised me. There had been a time when words like that would have landed differently, when they would have triggered questions, when they would have opened old fears. This time, they didn't. They felt familiar, like something that had already been said, in other ways. I realized then that the message wasn't late. It was right on time. It arrived exactly where everything else had been heading. I didn't reread it immediately. I set the phone down and went on with what I was doing. That, too, surprised me. I noticed how little urgency the message carried. It didn't demand a response. It didn't ask anything of me. It simply stated a future that wasn't defined. Maybe next year. Isn't a plan. It's a soft ending. A way to close a conversation without acknowledging what's being closed. I thought about how often I had heard that phrase before, in different contexts, different voices, always gentle, always reasonable. It's the kind of phrase that sounds considerate. It leaves space. It avoids finality, but it also removes expectation. Next year is far enough away that nothing has to be decided now. No calendars checked, no commitments made. I saw how well that matched the pattern. I had already stopped asking, stopped reminding. Silence had already become normal. The message didn't change anything. It confirmed what was already in place. I picked up the phone again and read it more carefully. There were no extra words hiding between the lines, no tone to interpret, just the message itself. I noticed how much energy I didn't spend trying to understand it. There was no analysis, no search for intention. That part of me had grown quiet. I thought about the effort it used to take to manage disappointment, to soften reactions, to find explanations that made things easier to accept. This time, none of that was needed. The message fit the structure. It didn't disrupt anything. It followed the logic I had already learned. Low maintenance leads to postponement. Silence leads to delay. Optional leads to later. It's no videos, add. I wasn't angry. Anger would have meant I expected something else. I wasn't hurt sharply. That would have meant I was still hoping. What I felt was emptiness, not sadness. Space, like a shelf where something used to be, and now wasn't. I realized then how important timing is to how something feels. If that message had come earlier, before I stopped asking, before silence settled in, it would have landed like rejection. Now, it landed like a conclusion that had been forming quietly. I didn't feel erased. I felt confirmed. Confirmed in my understanding of how little my presence had been required. I thought about replying, not to argue, not to persuade, just to acknowledge, but even that felt unnecessary. What would I be acknowledging? The message didn't invite conversation. It didn't ask for understanding. It simply closed the door gently. I noticed how practiced I was at accepting gentle closures, how often I had mistaken them for kindness. I realized that postponement is one of the easiest ways to avoid confronting loss. Nothing is denied outright. Nothing is said clearly. Everything is moved to a future that doesn't ask to be examined. Maybe next year. Doesn't hurt the way no does, but it also doesn't hold space. It doesn't imagine you. It just delays the absence. I sat with that thought for a while, not thinking about what I had lost, thinking about how long I had been losing it, in increments so small, they didn't register. This message wasn't the beginning. It was the receipt, proof of a transaction that had already happened. I had given up asking. I had made myself easy. I had normalized silence. This was the outcome. I realized how little the message said about him, and how much it said about the structure between us. No urgency, no expectation, just an assumption that I would understand. And I did, not because it was fair, because it was consistent. I thought about the word maybe in Ready Manst of the Doing, how it offers hope without commitment, how it sounds open while closing nothing. I had lived in maybe for a long time. Maybe later, maybe soon, maybe next time. Those words had trained me to wait without asking. Now, maybe next year felt like the final version of that pattern. I didn't reply, not to make a point, because there was nothing left to add. Silence, this time, wasn't avoidance. It was alignment. I set the phone down again and noticed how little space the message took up in my day. That, more than anything, told me the truth. If something no longer disrupts you, it's because you've already adjusted to its absence. The message didn't shock me. It didn't hurt the way loss is supposed to hurt. It simply arrived at the place I had already been standing. Late, perhaps, but not unexpected. And in that quiet recognition, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about being excluded in a moment. It was about having been postponed for so long. That exclusion no longer needed to announce itself. It could arrive softly, in 4 words, at the end of an ordinary day, and I could receive it without reacting, because the loss had already happened. It didn't shock me, because it wasn't new. That was the first truth I had to face. The message didn't arrive into an open space. It arrived into something already hollowed out. There had been a time when words like that would have rearranged my day, when they would have pulled my attention inward and demanded explanation. This time, they didn't ask for anything. They didn't disrupt my rhythm, and that told me everything. Shock comes from contrast, from the difference between what you expect and what actually happens. I wasn't shocked, because that difference no longer existed. I had already adjusted my expectations, long before the message arrived. I had learned how to expect less, without admitting that's what I was doing. Each time a response came late, I told myself timing didn't matter. Each time a detail was missing, I told myself I didn't need it. Each time I wasn't included early, I told myself it was fine. I didn't realize how carefully I was training myself to accept absence. By the time maybe next year appeared, it didn't feel like a break. It felt like the next logical step. I thought about how often shock is mistaken for pain. But pain doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it works quietly, wearing things down over time. I had been feeling that pain for a while, in small ways. In the way I stopped checking my phone, in the way I stopped planning around possibilities, in the way I stopped imagining myself as part of anything not explicitly stated. Shock requires hope, and hope had already been thinned out, not removed all at once, reduced gradually. I remembered moments when I had still expected more, when I would check in early, when I would wait for confirmation. Those moments had taught me something. That expectation led to waiting. Waiting led to uncertainty. And uncertainty led to disappointment. So, I shortened the process. I removed expectation first. I didn't do it consciously. I did it to cope. It's easier to live without being surprised than to keep adjusting to disappointment. That's how shock disappears. Not because things improve, because you stop believing they will. I noticed how calm I was after reading the message. That calm wasn't peace. It was familiarity. I recognized the pattern immediately. Delayed communication, soft language, an undefined future. I had seen it before, not just once, repeatedly. The message didn't introduce anything new. It simply named what had already been happening. I thought about how often I had told myself, at least they're being honest. Before holds, but honesty without intention doesn't create closeness. It just clarifies distance. I wasn't shocked, because distance had already become normal. There was a time when postponement felt temporary, when later still carried possibility. That time had passed. Postponement had become a category of its own, not a pause, a position. And positions, once established, rarely change without effort. I realized how often shock disappears when you stop being counted. You don't expect inclusion, so its absence doesn't startle you. You expect delay, so postponement feels neutral. I wasn't bracing for anything. That's why nothing landed heavily. I had already moved my emotional center. I had learned to place it somewhere that wouldn't be disturbed easily. That felt like strength at the time. It felt like resilience. But resilience can also mean learning how to carry loss quietly. I had become resilient in that way. I thought about how often people say, "At least you're handling it well." I will. As if handling something quietly means it hasn't taken anything from you. I was handling it well. Because I had practiced lowering stakes, lowering expectation, lowering visibility. By the time the message arrived, there was nothing left to lower. Shock requires something to fall from. I had already descended. I noticed how the message didn't create questions, not because answers were obvious, because questions felt pointless. What would I ask? When next year was? What would be different then? Those questions assume intention, assume planning. I no longer assumed those things. That's why there was no shock. Shock also comes from being seen suddenly, in a way you weren't prepared for. This message didn't see me at all. It didn't imagine my reaction. It didn't imagine my time. It simply moved forward. And I had already learned how to stay still when others moved on. I realized how much of my life had been shaped by that stillness. How often I had paused myself to make room for uncertainty. That wasn't accidental. It was learned. The absence of shock wasn't numbness. It was understanding. Understanding that the outcome matched the pattern. Patterns don't shock you. They confirm what you already know. I thought about how different this felt. From sudden loss. Sudden loss takes something away. This loss had been negotiated slowly, piece by piece, expectation by expectation, until there was nothing left to be surprised by. I didn't feel betrayed. Betrayal requires belief. I didn't feel abandoned. Abandonment requires departure. This felt like arrival. Arrival at a truth I had been circling for a while. I saw now how shock is often the last defense of hope. When hope runs out, shock goes with it. What remains is clarity. Not dramatic clarity. Quiet clarity. The kind that doesn't require reaction. The kind that allows you to read a message and simply put the phone down. I didn't respond. Not because I was punishing anyone. Because there was nothing left to negotiate. The message had reached me. After the emotional work was already done, shock would have meant I was still invested in a different outcome. I wasn't. And that realization didn't feel empty. It felt accurate. I had reached the point where the loss no longer needed to announce itself. It could arrive gently, unceremoniously, without reaction. That's why it didn't shock me. Not because it wasn't significant, but because significance had already been processed over time, in silence, in adjustment, in letting go of expectation before being told to. The message didn't take anything from me. It simply arrived after I had already let it go. And that, more than anything, told me where I stood, not in that moment, but long before it. I used to think silence protected me, that by saying nothing, I was avoiding conflict, avoiding pressure, avoiding disappointment. I didn't realize silence was doing something else at the same time. It was teaching, not through words, through consistency. Each time I stayed quiet, something was learned, not deliberately, naturally. People learn from what doesn't require response. When I stopped asking questions, no one needed to answer them. When I stopped following up, no one needed to explain delays. When I stopped expressing expectation, no one needed to consider it. Silence simplified everything. For them, I don't say that with bitterness. I say it with clarity. Silence removes friction. And when friction disappears, so does urgency. I noticed how easily plans moved forward, without me once I stopped checking in. Not because anyone decided to exclude me, because nothing required my inclusion. I had become easy to postpone. Postponement doesn't feel unkind. It feels reasonable. There's time. I after now. She understands. Is not for minute. We'll do it later. It's designed. Silence taught them that later was acceptable, that later carried no consequence. I thought about how often people respond to what's asked of them. How rarely they anticipate needs that aren't voiced. Anticipation requires imagination. Silence removes the need for it. I wasn't being imagined anymore, not out of malice, out of habit. When silence becomes reliable, others begin to rely on it. They trust that nothing will be demanded, that nothing will need adjustment, that nothing will need explanation. I had made myself predictable in my quiet. That predictability shaped how I was treated. I noticed how rarely anyone checked in, to ask how I felt about changes, not because they didn't care, because they had learned that my feelings wouldn't interrupt the plan. Silence had communicated that clearly. I realized how much labor silence saves for others. No difficult conversations, no reconsideration, no rescheduling. Silence makes everything move faster, and in a busy world, ease becomes its own value. I had offered ease generously, without realizing what it would cost. I saw how silence taught people that I would adapt afterward, that I would understand, that I would be fine. Those assumptions weren't cruel, they were logical. I had provided evidence. I thought about how often I had filled in gaps on my own, how often I had explained delays to myself, so no one else had to. Silence taught others that explanation was unnecessary. I had already done the work. I didn't realize how much responsibility silence shifts. When no one speaks, nothing needs to be addressed. No one has to take ownership of the outcome. Silence spreads responsibility thin until it disappears. I had helped that happen, not intentionally, but repeatedly. I noticed how easily maybe entered the conversation. Maybe later, maybe next time, maybe next year. Silence taught that maybe was enough, that it didn't need clarification, that it didn't need follow-through. Because no one was asking, I realized that silence doesn't signal strength the way I thought it did. It signals permission. Permission to delay. Permission to deprioritize. Permission to assume. I had mistaken silence for dignity, but dignity doesn't erase you. Silence can. I noticed how little discomfort others felt when plans changed, how smooth the transitions were. Silence had removed resistance, and resistance is what forces consideration. I wasn't resisting. I wasn't pushing back. I was absorbing. That absorption taught others that everything would be handled quietly, that nothing needed to be revisited, that there was no emotional cost to postponement. I realized how often I had believed that being understanding would be reciprocated, that if I didn't make things difficult, others wouldn't make things difficult for me. But relationships don't work on that logic. Understanding isn't contagious. It doesn't spread automatically. It has to be chosen. Silence doesn't encourage that choice. It makes it unnecessary. I thought about how many times I had told myself, they didn't mean it that way. End quote. Silence allowed intentions to remain vague. No one had to clarify. No one had to confront the impact. Impact disappears when it's never named. I wasn't angry about this realization. Anger would have meant someone did something wrong. This wasn't wrong. It was structural. Silence creates structure, and structures determine outcomes. I had helped build one where my absence required no adjustment, where my presence wasn't essential, where postponement didn't register as loss. Silence taught others that my timeline was flexible, that my expectations were low, that my needs were manageable. Eventually, that lesson solidified. I thought about how rarely people are cruel intentionally. Most harm happens because nothing interrupts momentum. Silence doesn't interrupt, it smooths. And smooth systems don't stop to look around. I had been part of that smoothing. I had reduced friction so effectively that I removed myself from consideration. Silence taught others that they could move forward without checking, that nothing would break. And nothing did. That was the problem. Nothing breaking felt like success. But success without presence is quiet loss. I realized how different things might have been if I had spoken earlier. Not louder, clearer. But this wasn't about regret. Regret assumes choice with full knowledge. I hadn't had that. I was learning now. I saw how silence had taught others, not what I wanted them to know. But what I had allowed them to assume, assumptions, once established, are hard to undo. They feel natural. They feel earned. I had earned them through consistency. I wasn't blaming myself. Blame would suggest fault. This was cause and effect. Silence produces ease. Ease produces distance. Distance produces postponement. The message didn't create the loss. Silence had already explained everything. Others didn't need to be reminded, because silence had already done the teaching. I understood then that silence isn't neutral. It educates. It shapes behavior. It sets expectations. And once those expectations are set, people act within them. I had lived inside that system for a long time. The realization didn't hurt. It clarified. If silence teaches others how little they need to consider you, then speaking even quietly changes the lesson. Not by force, by presence. I wasn't ready yet to change anything. This chapter wasn't about action. It was about seeing what silence had been doing. While I thought it was protecting me, it hadn't been cruel. It had been efficient. And efficiency, left unchecked, doesn't make room for people. It makes room for movement. I had been moved aside, not by intention, but by momentum, and silence had been the engine. Understanding that didn't fix anything, but it did one important thing. It removed confusion. I no longer wondered why maybe next year felt so natural. Silence had already prepared everyone for it, including me. And once I saw that clearly, I knew something fundamental had shifted, not in how others behaved, in how I understood my own quiet. Silence had taught its lesson. Now I finally knew what it had been saying all along. For a long time, I believed making things easy was generous, easy to schedule, easy to adjust, easy to understand. I thought ease was a kindness I offered freely. I didn't see it as a trade. But every kind of ease has a cost. I just hadn't added it up yet. At first, making things easy felt like maturity. I didn't need explanations. I didn't need timelines. I didn't need reassurance. I told myself that needing less meant burdening others less, and burden felt like the wrong thing to be. So I learned how to soften my presence. I learned how to adapt without comment. I learned how to accept changes quietly. Each time I did, nothing broke. No arguments. No tension. That absence of conflict felt like proof that I was doing the right thing. But conflict isn't the only signal that something matters. Sometimes, the absence of resistance is exactly what removes you from consideration. I noticed how easily plans shifted. Once I became flexible, dates moved, details changed, and no one checked to see if those changes affected me. They didn't need to. I had already shown that I would adapt. Making things easy taught others that adjustment would happen on my side, that my calendar was open, that my expectations were low, that nothing needed to be confirmed early. Ease creates that assumption, not maliciously, logically. If someone doesn't require structure, you stop building it around them. I didn't realize how quickly ease turns into invisibility, not dramatic invisibility, functional invisibility, the kind that allows systems to operate smoothly without accounting for you. I thought about how often I had said, "Whatever works," and, quote, how often I had meant it, how often those words had relieved others from having to decide with me in mind. I had thought of that as generosity. I hadn't thought of it as removal. I saw how making things easy gradually moved me out of the planning stage and into the update stage. I was informed later, included afterward, sometimes remembered, sometimes not. And because I didn't object, the structure solidified. I became someone you didn't need to check with. That status comes with comfort for others. It also comes with loss. I lost my place in the early conversation, the one where decisions are shaped, where presence is assumed. Ease pushed me past that point quietly. I noticed how often postponement appeared. Once ease was established, later felt acceptable, soon felt reasonable, maybe next year felt natural. Ease stretches time. It tells people nothing urgent depends on you. I wasn't urgent anymore. That wasn't because I wasn't important. It was because I had made importance unnecessary. I had removed the signals that create urgency. Signals like asking, like clarifying, like stating what mattered. I had done that to avoid pressure, but pressure is what holds space. Without it, space collapses inward. I thought about how often I had admired myself for being adaptable, how proud I had been of not making demands. I saw now how that pride had blinded me to the cost. Ease had made me easier to postpone, not easier to include. I hadn't lost connection in one moment. I had lost priority over time, and priority doesn't disappear loudly. It fades. It's replaced by convenience. I realized how often I had believed that if I didn't complicate things, I would be appreciated more. But appreciation doesn't come from ease. It comes from intention, and intention fades when ease removes the need for it. I saw how making things easy had shifted responsibility away from others. They didn't need to plan carefully. They didn't need to follow through precisely. They didn't need to communicate clearly. Ease absorbed those gaps. On my side, I had done that willingly, not because I wanted to disappear, because I wanted to belong without effort. But belonging without effort often turns into presence without importance. I noticed how rarely my absence disrupted anything, how smoothly things continued. That smoothness used to reassure me. Now, it unsettled me. If nothing changes when you're not there, it means you weren't part of the structure. You were an addition. Ease had turned me into an addition. Optional. I wasn't angry at myself for that. Anger assumes awareness. I had done what felt right with what I understood. I had chosen ease because it felt kind, because it avoided friction, because it allowed relationships to continue without discomfort. But continuity isn't closeness, and ease isn't the same as care. I saw how often I had mistaken being low maintenance for being valued. I had thought my flexibility made me easier to keep. It had actually made me easier to move. I thought about how often people are told, "Don't be difficult. It's never 10-backed." How that phrase teaches us to minimize ourselves. I had internalized that lesson. I had become proficient at being easy, and proficiency has consequences. The more consistent you are, the more others rely on it. I had been consistently easy, so others stopped preparing for me. That's the cost. Not rejection, replacement by assumption. Assumption that I would understand, that I would adapt, that I would be fine. I was. Until I wasn't. But even then, the cost didn't arrive as pain. It arrived as clarity. Clarity that ease had traded my presence for smoothness. That it had traded my role for efficiency. That trade had been accepted silently. On both sides, I realized that ease isn't neutral. It shapes how you're positioned. It teaches others what they can rely on and what they don't need to consider. I had taught them that I didn't need to be considered early. That lesson had stuck. The cost of making it easy was that I stopped being planned for, not intentionally excluded, structurally removed. I wasn't in the frame anymore. I was outside of it. And because nothing broke, no one noticed, including me, until the message came, until maybe next year arrived, and landed without shock. That was the final confirmation. Ease had done its work. I hadn't been pushed out. I had eased myself out gently, not because I wanted less, because I didn't want to demand more. That distinction mattered. I didn't regret being kind. I didn't regret being flexible. I regretted confusing ease with safety. Safety doesn't require you to shrink. Ease often does. I saw now that making things easy had protected others from inconvenience, not me from loss. The loss was subtle, but it was real. I lost my place in the plan. Not because I wasn't loved, but because I had made myself unnecessary. That's the cost. And once you see it, you can't pretend it isn't there. You can still choose ease, but you choose it differently, with awareness of what it gives and what it takes. This wasn't a moment of decision yet. This was recognition. Recognition that making things easy had a price I had been paying quietly. Recognition that the quiet wasn't accidental. It was earned. And now that I could see the cost clearly, I knew something was changing, not in anger, not in protest, but in how I understood what ease had been buying me and what it had taken instead. I noticed the absence before I reacted to it. That was unexpected. There was no jolt, no rush of feeling that arrived ahead of thought. I simply became aware. that I wasn't there, and nothing inside me moved to protest. There had been a time when absence carried weight, when it pressed in, when it raised questions. This time, it didn't. Not because it felt good, and not because it didn't matter. It felt unfamiliar. I paid attention to that. I thought about how I used to imagine myself in places before arriving, how I would picture where I might sit, what I might say. That imagining hadn't happened. So when I wasn't included, nothing collapsed. There was no picture to erase. I noticed how my body stayed still. No tightening, no urgency to check. That, more than anything, unsettled me. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't disappointed. I just remained where I was. I went through the rest of the day without returning to the absence. That had never happened before. Normally, it would follow me. It would ask for attention. This time, it didn't. I didn't know what that meant yet. I only noticed that something had shifted out of reach. I thought about expectation, how quietly it forms, how easily it settles into habit. Expectation doesn't announce itself. It just stays. I began to sense that it hadn't been staying with me for a while. That recognition didn't arrive as clarity. It arrived as distance. I wasn't waiting. I wasn't bracing. The absence didn't interrupt anything. That detail stayed with me. I thought about how pain usually works. It demands response. It insists on being addressed. This absence didn't. It passed through, without stopping. I didn't label that experience. I didn't try to explain it. I only noticed that the absence didn't pull me backward, and it didn't push me forward either. It left me where I was. That felt unfamiliar enough to matter. I didn't tell myself that something was over. I didn't tell myself that something had resolved. I just noticed that I wasn't reaching. Not intentionally, not decisively. I simply wasn't doing it. That realization didn't come with relief. It came with quiet unease, like standing somewhere new, without knowing whether you'll stay. I noticed how often absence had hurt before, because I had been leaning toward it. This time, I wasn't leaning. I didn't know when that had changed. I only knew that the absence no longer asked me to move. I stayed with that. I didn't interpret it. I didn't make meaning out of it. I let it remain incomplete, because whatever was happening wasn't finished yet. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't be able to experience absence the same way again. That awareness didn't feel like strength. It didn't feel like acceptance. It felt unresolved, and unresolved was enough to keep me from returning to where I had been before. I didn't lose anything in a moment of conflict. There was no argument, no raised voice, no door slammed hard enough to mark an ending. Nothing was taken from me. That's what made it difficult to name. What I lost slipped away without resistance, without demand, without a fight. For a long time, I thought loss had to look dramatic, that it needed proof, that it needed confrontation. I didn't know loss could happen while everyone remained polite, while conversations stayed calm, while messages stayed gentle. I didn't know you could lose something simply by stepping back often enough. What I lost wasn't a person. He didn't disappear. He didn't leave. He continued living his life, moving forward in ways that made sense to him. What changed wasn't his presence. It was my position. I lost the version of myself who believed waiting was an act of love, the version who thought patience would eventually be noticed, who believed that if she stayed quiet long enough, space would open on its own. That version of me didn't vanish overnight. She faded. She stepped back each time she chose not to ask. Each time she told herself, "It's okay, anyone." Each time she accepted delay as something temporary. I didn't fight to keep her. I let her go quietly. I lost the habit of anticipating. There was a time when I would imagine how things might unfold, where I might fit, how plans could include me. That imagination stopped. Not because I decided to stop caring, because caring without movement became exhausting. I lost the reflex to hope. Hope didn't disappear suddenly. It thinned until it stopped stretching forward. Hope requires participation. It requires believing that your presence matters enough to be planned for. That belief had eroded, and without it, hope had nothing to attach to. I lost the version of myself who waited by the door, not physically, emotionally. The one who stayed available, who kept room in her schedule, who didn't commit to other things, just in case. That waiting had once felt responsible, like being ready. Now, it felt unnecessary. I stopped holding that space. I lost the illusion that silence was neutral, that by saying nothing, nothing would change. I saw now that silence was a choice, not a loud one, but a consistent one. And consistency creates outcomes. I had chosen silence long enough that the outcome no longer needed announcement. I lost the belief that being understanding would eventually be returned. That understanding, offered generously, would inspire consideration. That belief was never spoken aloud. It lived quietly in my expectations. And expectations shape how loss feels. When those expectations dissolved, so did the pain that depended on them. I lost the expectation of being counted, not deliberately, gradually. I stopped expecting to be included early, stopped expecting to be asked, stopped expecting my absence to register. Those expectations had once hurt when unmet. Now, they simply didn't exist. I lost the version of myself who would have been surprised. Surprise requires belief in a different outcome. I no longer had that belief. That wasn't cynicism. It was realism shaped by experience. I didn't fight this loss because there was nothing to fight against. No decision had been made against me. No line had been crossed dramatically. Everything happened within the boundaries I had helped set. I had taught others that postponement was acceptable, that silence meant flexibility, that my presence wasn't urgent. The loss followed that lesson logically. I lost urgency. Urgency is what holds space. Without it, everything becomes optional, and optional things are easy to move, easy to delay, easy to forget. I lost the version of myself who believed closeness was maintained by endurance, who thought staying quiet was a form of loyalty. I saw now that loyalty without mutual intention turns into self-erasure. That realization didn't hurt sharply. It settled. I lost the habit of explaining things away, of telling myself stories that softened disappointment. I stopped saying, "They didn't mean it," end quote. The reformation, not because it wasn't true, because intention wasn't the point anymore. Impact was, and the impact was distance. I lost the comfort of ambiguity. Ambiguity had allowed me to stay hopeful, to believe things could change without effort. Clarity removed that comfort, but it also removed confusion. I wasn't angry about that. I didn't need someone to apologize. An apology wouldn't restore what was gone, because what was gone wasn't taken. It was relinquished. I lost the version of myself who believed that if she made herself easy enough, she would be kept. I had believed ease was an invitation. I hadn't seen how it could become a reason not to prepare, not to prioritize, not to imagine. I didn't fight to keep that belief, because by the time I saw its cost, it no longer fit. I lost the habit of centering my worth on inclusion. I didn't declare independence. I simply stopped measuring myself by where I wasn't. That shift didn't feel empowering. It felt practical. I had stopped standing in places that didn't need me. I lost the version of myself who waited for acknowledgement, who needed confirmation that she mattered. That version wasn't weak. She was hopeful in a way that required permission from others. I no longer needed that permission, not because I rejected connection, because I refused to disappear for it. I didn't fight to keep my role, because the role had already changed. I was no longer central, and centrality can't be reclaimed through silence. It requires presence. But presence requires intention on both sides. That intention wasn't there, so the role dissolved. I lost it without resistance, without protest, without scene. I realized then that some losses aren't tragedies. They're transitions that go unnoticed until you realize you're standing somewhere else. I wasn't grieving a person. I was grieving a posture, a way of standing in relation to someone, a way of waiting, a way of hoping. That posture no longer made sense, so it fell away. I didn't mourn loudly. There was no ceremony. The loss didn't ask to be acknowledged. It had already been absorbed. I noticed how little space the loss occupied in my thoughts. That was the clearest sign. If something truly defines you, losing it leaves noise. This loss left quiet. Not because it was small, because it had been happening for a long time. I didn't lose him. I lost the version of me who kept waiting, and that version didn't need a fight to disappear. She had already been letting go, one small silence at a time. By the time I noticed she was gone, there was no one left to argue on her behalf. No one left to demand a place. Only me, standing where I had slowly arrived, not defeated, not triumphant, just clear. Clear about what had ended, clear about what had been given up, without anyone asking for it, and clear about one thing above all: some losses don't come from conflict. They come from accommodation. They don't need a fight. They only need time. And I had given that time willingly, quietly, until the loss was complete. I read the message again, not because I needed clarity, because I wanted to be sure. There was nothing I was missing. There wasn't. The words stayed exactly where they were. Light. Non-committal. I set the phone down. That was the moment. Not replying didn't come from anger. If I had been angry, there would have been something to say. An explanation. A protest. A question that still hoped for movement. But there was nothing left to ask. I noticed how unfamiliar that felt. For so long, silence had been something I fell into. This time, it was something I chose. I didn't feel the urge to justify myself. I didn't feel the need to soften the moment. I didn't think about how my silence might be interpreted. That was new. Usually, I managed reactions before they happened. I imagined how my absence would be read, and adjusted accordingly. This time, I didn't. I realized that not replying wasn't avoidance. It was accuracy. Accuracy about what the message offered. Accuracy about what it didn't. The message didn't invite conversation. It didn't open a door. It closed one gently. Replying would have created a conversation that wasn't actually there. I thought about all the times I had replied anyway. Times when I filled space that hadn't been made for me. Times when I responded to keep things smooth, to show understanding, to reassure. Those replies had always come quickly, automatically. This one didn't. I felt no urgency. That absence of urgency surprised me. Urgency usually meant I still believed. My response could change something. I didn't believe that anymore. Not in a bitter way. In a settled way, I realized then that silence can mean different things, depending on where it comes from. Before, my silence came from caution, from wanting to be easy, from not wanting to impose. This silence came from clarity, from seeing the shape of the situation and not needing to reshape it. I noticed how calm my body felt, not braced, not tense. There was no argument happening internally, no debate. That told me something important. When silence feels heavy, it's because something is unresolved. This silence felt complete. I wasn't withholding anything. I wasn't waiting to respond later. I simply wasn't responding, and that felt honest. I thought about how often silence is interpreted as passive, as weakness, as retreat. But this silence didn't retreat from anything. It stood still. I wasn't stepping back. I wasn't stepping forward. I was staying where I was. Replying would have required me to step back into a role I had already left. The role of explaining, the role of understanding first, the role of keeping the bridge intact, even when no one was crossing it. I didn't want to be in that role anymore. Not because it was wrong, because it no longer fit. I noticed how tempting it was to add something simple. Okay. Oh wait, it manager. Sounds good. I have a lot of tated. Maybe. End quote. Those words would have cost me nothing, but they would have said more than I intended. They would have implied openness. They would have suggested availability. They would have kept the pattern alive. Not replying ended the pattern quietly, not with a statement, with absence. I realized then that silence can be an answer, not a dramatic one, a truthful one. The answer wasn't no, Hydrit. It wasn't yes. It elevated it exton. It was, "This is where I stop participating." It's no ever. That answer didn't need words. I thought about how often I had responded to preserve tone, to make sure nothing felt awkward, to protect relationships from discomfort. I didn't feel responsible for that anymore. Discomfort wasn't being created. Clarity was. I noticed how quickly the moment passed. I read the message. I didn't reply, and life continued. That simplicity mattered. Not replying didn't disrupt my day. It didn't weigh on me. It didn't linger. It simply happened. I thought about how different that felt from earlier silences. Those silences had been filled with second-guessing. This one wasn't. I didn't wonder if I should say something later. I didn't plan a follow-up. I didn't hold the thought open. The door closed, and I let it close. Not replying wasn't punishment. I wasn't teaching a lesson. I wasn't hoping for a reaction. I wasn't waiting to be noticed. That was the difference. When silence is used to be seen, it's heavy. When silence is used to be honest, it's light. I realized that not replying was the first time. My silence matched my understanding. Before, silence had been misaligned. I knew more than I allowed myself to act on. This time, action matched knowledge. That alignment felt steady. I thought about how many times I had replied out of habit, out of politeness, out of fear that silence would be misinterpreted. I didn't care about interpretation now. Not because I was indifferent, because I was finished explaining myself. I had explained enough. I had understood enough. I had adjusted enough. Not replying was the simplest way to acknowledge that. It wasn't a boundary drawn loudly. It was a boundary expressed through absence. I noticed how easily I moved on. I made dinner. I turned on a lamp. I went about my evening. The message stayed where it was, unread again, unanswered. It didn't follow me. That was the clearest sign. When something truly requires response, it pulls at you. This didn't. It stayed still. I realized then that some endings don't need closure conversations. They close because participation stops. Not replying was that stop. Not dramatic. Not final in a cinematic sense. Final enough. I wasn't shutting anyone out. I was stepping out of a loop. The loop of postponement. The loop of hoping. The loop of being easy. I had stepped out quietly, and the world didn't shake. Nothing collapsed. That mattered too. I saw how often we fear that choosing ourselves will cause disruption. This didn't. It simply shifted something internally. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't holding space. I wasn't negotiating timelines in my head. I had accepted where things were. And from that acceptance, silence felt appropriate. Not replying didn't change the situation. It acknowledged it. Acknowledgement doesn't need words. It needs honesty. That honesty felt calm. I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel resolved. I felt aligned. Aligned with what I knew. Aligned with what I had already let go of. Not replying wasn't the end of something. It was the confirmation that the end had already happened. I had simply stopped pretending otherwise. The phone stayed on the table. The message stayed unread again. And I stayed where I was. Not waiting. Not responding. Just present. That was enough. For most of my life, silence had meant something simple. It was how I avoided conflict, how I kept things from becoming uncomfortable, how I smoothed what didn't need to be said. Silence had been useful. It helped things move along. I rarely questioned it. At some point, that changed. Not all at once. Not in a way I could point to. I just noticed that silence began to feel different. Before, silence felt active. It required effort. I had to hold myself back from responding, from explaining, from adjusting the tone. It carried tension. It waited. This silence didn't. I wasn't holding anything in. I wasn't stopping myself from saying something important. There was simply nothing I felt compelled to say. That unsettled me at first. I noticed how little I checked my phone afterward, not because I was trying to be disciplined, because I didn't feel pulled. That hadn't been true before. Silence used to mean restraint. It meant I was choosing patience over discomfort. The silence didn't feel like a choice. It felt like a pause that had already settled. I thought about how often silence is misunderstood, how quickly it's assumed to hide something. Sometimes it does. But sometimes silence appears. When a conversation no longer has momentum, I wasn't silent to make a point. I wasn't waiting for anything to change. The exchange had already slowed on its own. That realization didn't bring relief. It brought distance. Not emotional distance. Structural distance. The kind that rearranges how close something feels, without changing how you feel about the person. I didn't feel colder. I didn't feel detached. I felt steadier than before. I noticed that silence had stopped being a reaction. Before, it responded to circumstances. Now, it reflected where I stood in them. That distinction mattered. When silence reacts, it depends on what happens next. When it doesn't, it stays where it is. I thought about how often I had used silence to protect harmony, to prevent tension, to keep things intact. This silence wasn't doing that. It wasn't guarding anything. It was simply there. I didn't feel the urge to explain myself. That urge had faded. Explaining assumes there is something to correct. I no longer felt that. I noticed how much effort silence used to take. The internal checking, the constant recalculating. This silence didn't ask for management. It didn't stretch time. It didn't hold anything open. It just existed. I realized then that silence changes when expectation loosens. As long as expectation is present, silence feels unfinished. Without it, silence feels complete enough to stand on its own. That didn't feel final. It didn't feel permanent. It felt provisional. I wasn't waiting anymore, but I wasn't closing doors either. I thought about how stillness is often mistaken for numbness. They're not the same. Numbness avoids feeling. Stillness allows it without urgency. I wasn't trying to disappear. I was simply no longer filling space that didn't hold me. That was new. I still spoke. I still connected. I just didn't speak into places that had already moved on. Silence hadn't shut me down. It had narrowed where I showed up. I didn't announce that change. I didn't explain it. I noticed how unfamiliar that felt, but not wrong. Silence had stopped being a holding pattern. It wasn't a landing either. It was somewhere in between. And for now, that was enough to stay with. If you've ever been put off gently, you know how quiet it feels. Not like rejection, not like conflict, more like a soft hand on the shoulder, guiding you away from something that used to feel close. It doesn't hurt all at once. It settles. You're told later, and you nod. You're told maybe, and you understand. No one says no. No one says goodbye. And somehow, that makes it harder to name. I didn't realize how many times I had been put off gently until I stopped waiting for things to change. I had mistaken gentleness for care. I had confused soft language with intention. I thought being put off meant there was still a place for me, just not yet. But not yet can stretch a long way when no one is measuring the distance. There's a chair in my living room that I think about sometimes. It isn't special. It doesn't match the others perfectly. It sits a little apart, not excluded, not central. It's the visitor's chair, the kind of chair you don't build the room around, but keep available. If someone sits in it, they're welcome. If they don't, the room still works. For a long time, I lived like that chair. Available, present, never essential to the structure. I told myself that was humility, that it was kindness, that it made things easier for everyone. And it did, just not for me. Being put off gently teaches you how to wait without expecting, how to stay quiet without disappearing entirely, how to accept delay as a reasonable substitute for belonging. I had learned those lessons well, too well. I didn't argue when plans shifted. I didn't ask when timelines blurred. I didn't insist on clarity. I thought clarity would make things uncomfortable. What I didn't see was how discomfort had been redistributed. It had moved inward. I carried it quietly, so no one else had to. If you've ever done that, you're not weak. You're practiced. Practiced at smoothing edges, at absorbing ambiguity, at believing that patience is a form of love. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just endurance. I didn't close any doors. That's important. I didn't draw lines or make declarations. I didn't demand explanations or issue ultimatums. The door is still open, but I stopped stepping back to keep it that way. That was the change. The door doesn't require retreat. It doesn't require you to reduce yourself. so others can pass comfortably. You can leave it open, without moving. If someone wants to come in, they will. If they don't, you don't follow them out. To ask why. I didn't learn that suddenly. It came after too many gentle postponements. After too many, maybe next times. I was not Minner. After too many moments, where my presence wasn't refused. Just unnecessary. Being put off gently doesn't announce loss. It delays it. Until one day, you realize you're no longer waiting. Not because you decided to stop, because there's nothing left to wait for. That realization isn't dramatic. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like sitting down and noticing the room for the first time. I still care. That didn't disappear. Care doesn't vanish just because expectation does. But care without expectation moves differently. It doesn't chase. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't need reassurance. It simply exists. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I won't tell you to speak up. I won't tell you to walk away. Those decisions come later, or not at all. This isn't about action. It's about recognition. About noticing when gentle has become habitual, when postponement has replaced planning, when your presence is treated as flexible instead of foundational. You don't need to confront anyone to see that clearly. You don't need permission to stop shrinking. Sometimes the most honest response is no response at all. Not as punishment, as alignment. Alignment with what you already know. The visitor's chair is still there. That matters. It means you haven't hardened. It means you haven't closed yourself off, but you no longer sit in it by default. You sit where you belong, and if someone wants to join you, they will pull up a chair. They will make space, not gently postpone, not leave the room unchanged. They will adjust. If they don't, you don't explain the difference. You don't point to the chair and ask them to notice it. You let the room speak for itself. Being put off gently doesn't make you invisible. It teaches you where you were never centered. That knowledge isn't cruel. It's clarifying. You don't need to dramatize it. You don't need to turn it into a story about blame or betrayal. Sometimes it's simply the end of waiting. If you've ever been allowed, but not expected. If you've ever been postponed without being refused. If you've ever stayed quiet so no one would feel pressured. You didn't imagine the shift. You adapted to it. And adaptation, when it goes unexamined, can cost you your place. You don't get that place back by fighting. You get it back by stopping the trade. The trade where you offer flexibility in exchange for belonging. Belonging doesn't work that way. It never did. The door is open. That hasn't changed, but you're not standing behind it anymore, holding it with one hand, hoping someone notices the effort. You're inside the room, seated, present. If someone enters, they enter on purpose. And if they don't, you remain where you are. Not smaller, not louder, just grounded. That's not distance. That's dignity. And if this story felt close to you, you don't need to comment. You don't need to explain. You don't need to prove anything. Just notice where you're still waiting and where you've already stopped. Sometimes that's enough. The rest will follow, quietly, when it's ready.